Welcome to Mental Stillness. My name is Derek, and I'm excited that somehow you stumbled across this podcast. One of my goals when starting this podcast was to bring mental health conversations into leadership circles. Today's guest is Damon Lembi. He leads the charge as the CEO of Learnit, which is a global training company. And their organization has upskilled more than 2 million people in the workplace. He's been at the organization pushing on 30 years. And prior to that, he comes from a career in baseball. And a fun fact about Damon is he actually hit a home run in the College World Series. Not many people can say that. That's pretty cool. But he does bring a ton of wisdom from his sports background and the last 30 years of working for this learning and development organization. And we cover a wide range of topics in this conversation. He has an amazing podcast called the Learn It All podcast, and I was a guest on there. The episode should be coming out in the next few weeks. But let's get into my conversation with Damon, and I hope you enjoy.
Well, Derek, first of all, I'm honored to be here, so thanks for having me. And for your listeners, I'm Damon Lembi, and I'm born and raised in San Francisco. I live out in Sausalito now. I grew up, my life was mostly about sports. I love sports, and all my buddies played sports. And back in the day, it was baseball and the Giants, San Francisco 49ers during football season, and then the Warriors. And when I got into high school, I realized that if I wanted to play college or professional sports, that baseball was really my ticket. And so I went all in on baseball. I worked really, really hard, and it worked out well for me. I was a high school All-American, and I had one of my first very big decisions my senior year. I got drafted by the Atlanta Braves. Now, this was back in 1995, so I'm dating myself a little bit here. And
They had a pretty good roster at that point too.
well, the thing about it was, the first pick of the draft that year was Chipper Jones. So if I would have signed, I was the 13th round. He was the first round. He would have played shortstop. I would have been first baseman. So I kind of missed out on that. And I also had a full ride to Pepperdine University. And I chose the path of going to college. My parents were awesome, Derek. They said, look, this is your life. Do what you want. Do whatever you think you want to do. Now, really, my mindset back then was I was a 17-year-old kid. And I was kind of young for, graduating from high school, and I was a little intimidated. And plus, I really believed in the vision that our coach had at Pepperdine. His name was Andy Lopez. He's a Hall of Fame college baseball coach. And when I went in and met with him, he said, hey, look, Damon, here's what we're going to do. We're a small school. We're about 2,500 students, but we're going to win the College World Series, if not next year, but the following year. And that's a moonshot dream, a goal. Because, you're going up against University of Texas, Arizona State with thousands of students, huge baseball factories. But he believed in it. And, so I bought into that, and I turned down the opportunity to go with the Braves and to the minor leagues, and I went to Pepperdine. And so I get to Pepperdine, and for the first time in my life, I kind of struggled with imposter syndrome, in the sense that, I was always used to being, the best in the county or whatever, but then everybody was as good as I was. These were all the best of the best. And I froze up a little bit. I ended up getting hurt. And then I left Pepperdine. And I had to bounce around for a little bit to a junior college. And then I was lucky enough to get an opportunity to go play at Arizona State, another huge school. Now, the funny thing is, the year I left Pepperdine, guess what? They won the World Series. So I'm super happy for them. I wrote a book called The Learn It All Leader, and I talk a lot about Andy Lopez in there and everything he taught me. So I get the full ride to Arizona State, and a lot of people I knew were saying, Damon, don't go to Arizona State. There'll be 17 guys trying out for first base. Go to a small school, go to a place where you can play and get your degree and move on. And so I was thinking to myself, Derek, at that time, I'm like, look, this is my last shot for baseball. This is something that I've always wanted to do. My whole life kind of revolved around it. And so this is my last chance. And I don't want to look back 25 years later and think, passing up an opportunity to play at school like that. So I went to Arizona State. I worked really, really hard. I won the starting first base position, had a great year. I hit a home run in the College World Series. My wife loves to say that's my glory days, which is
You
kind of
remind her
true.
about it frequently, right?
I don't remind her as much as she thinks I do, but yeah, I mean, it comes up every now and then. She's like, "Okay, here comes this story again."
Your mic drop moment.
My mic drop moment. Even it was before the internet, really, definitely. And but it's still funny how many people saw it. It was the featured game on CBS that year because we had a coach who I learned so much from, Jim Brock, who was dying of cancer. He actually died during the middle of the College World Series.
Oh, wow.
So he was he coached people like Barry Bonds and Reggie Jackson, and he was showing up to the games knowing that this was the end for him. So it was a big story. And so yeah, I hit a home run in the College World Series. It happened to be the same time as the Major League Draft, and this was waiting for my phone call. My roommate, one of my best friends, Jacob Cruz, got his call at 8 o'clock in the morning. San Francisco Giants first round pick. I'm happy for Cruz. 10 more guys on the team got drafted. I'm waiting around. My call never came, and essentially, this was it for my baseball career. I didn't get drafted, and I could have probably went the walk-on route, but I was pretty depressed. And here I am, and I'll stop here. Here I am, 22 years old, and my whole identity was wrapped up in being a baseball player. I didn't know if any of my skills were transferable into the business world, and I was kind of depressed and at a loss.
I'm sure there was a whole lot of processing going on internally. So, how did you start to figure out if your skill sets were transferable?
How I did it was I said, look, I know I can be great at something. I'm very fortunate. I came from this family, great parents. My dad was a super successful business person. My mom was a wonderful wife. I'm the oldest of four kids and mother. And I said, I always wanted to please my dad too. I love baseball, and he was a huge baseball guy. And they always were so supportive as parents. And I said, I have this competitive drive. I want to be great at something. And I figured there's got to be something. And I was lucky enough that we had a bunch of different businesses. We had a hotel chain, real estate company. But again, I was afraid to go into. I didn't know if the skills I learned playing baseball were transferable. And at the time, my dad was starting this computer training company called Learnit. Um, like a lot of great entrepreneurs, what he did was he took a class because he wanted to digitize our real estate portfolio. He thought the class was boring. He said, there's got to be a better way to do it. That's where he came up with the idea for Learnit. He hired our CFO at the time from our savings and loan. And he said, I want to have short classes that are inexpensive, Windows 95, Microsoft Word. And that's where the idea of Learnit came from. And that was just starting in June of '95. We're coming up on our 30-year anniversary, which is unbelievable in June of 2025. And so I knew the guy, John Ashton, who was starting off as a CEO. And I said, I'm just going to start. I'll take the receptionist position at Learnit. One, because I wasn't sure my skills were transferable, and I didn't know what I was capable of doing. I never had a job. I mean, my college was paid for through baseball. I traveled the world, even in high school, in places like Korea and other places playing baseball. And but I said, look, I'm going to suck up my pride. I'm going to take a job at the front desk. The other reason was because I didn't want to be seen by the rest of the employees like, daddy put him in a senior leadership position. I wanted to show them off the bat, even though there was only like 10, 15 people at the time, that I could belong and I could contribute. So I started off as a receptionist. I think to this day, I still probably answered more phones than anybody else. And it is, it did kind of, I had no more pride after that, really. I went from hitting a home run in the College World Series to being a receptionist at the front desk in the financial district of San Francisco, which, by the way, a lot of my friends were getting out of college and they had some pretty cool jobs. And, here I was, just getting started. But one of the first things that I saw in the corporate world was I didn't see the same level of desire and drive that I did in sports. Derek, people were showing up late to work. We'd lose deals and nobody really cared. And I'm just like, this is not only my family's money, but I want to make sure that I want to see Learnit be successful. So I learned a lot. And I answered phones, but I started teaching classes. I figured we could save money if I could learn and teach classes like Microsoft Word or Excel. I started doing sales, and I even helped out with IT stuff. And fast forward, 5 years, The gentleman who was CEO wasn't working out. They were looking for somebody else. I threw my hat in the ring and I said, look, Dad and everybody else on the board, I've answered the phone more than anybody else. I've closed some of our biggest deals. One of our biggest deals was a deal we closed with Gap Corporate, and also one was Chevron. And I've taught classes, and I love Learnit, and I'd love the opportunity. And they're like, okay, you know what? We'll give you the opportunity. So I became the CEO, and that was right around, if you remember this, was the .com days. Beginning of 2000, 2001. And I'm like, man, this is pretty easy. I'm a 26-year-old CEO. All you have to do at this time is have fax paper in the fax machine. Deals are just coming in. Like a lot of young CEOs, I got a little cocky and wanted to expand and open up more locations. My dad gave me pushback on it, said that, bigger is not always better. But I'm like, look at all my buddies. They're paper millionaires with all their .com businesses. And he said, well, okay, we'll do it. Sure enough, we did it. The .com bust happened, 9/11, and we kind of collapsed. But we stayed in business. We probably wouldn't have stayed in business if I didn't have my family's financial backing, for the first go around. But it was an incredible, incredible learning opportunity. And it's one thing. It's where it's really hard. I had to turn to my grandfather and my dad every couple of weeks and say, "Hey, how's it going, you guys? Can I borrow $10,000 for payroll?" And that wasn't a very fun conversation, especially with my grandfather. He'd get pretty fired up. But they always came through and never gave up. Learned a lot of great lessons from it. And fast forward, here we are. 20 plus years after that, was able to pay them back and haven't had to be in a situation where something like that happened again. And I learned a lot of great lessons from what happened in 2001 for future recessions and downturns, whether in 2009 and the start of COVID. So there's been some, bumps along the way, but Learnit, for your listeners out there, we're a live learning platform. Essentially, it means we're a learning and development company. We do B2B training, and customers turn to us when they are looking to onboard new managers and they need a different skill set, or maybe a team's struggling with retention. And one great way to show that you care as an organization is to invest in their professional development growth. And now we're doing a lot of training around how companies could even adopt AI and get behind that. So that's in a very quick nutshell where we're at today.
You talked about the evolution of yourself as a leader, and some themes jump out to me. One is, servant leadership, starting out, raising your hand, saying, "Hey, I'll answer phone calls. I'm not above that." And you talked about how that informed you in many ways, that positioned you well to be a CEO in the future. And in that moment, you didn't know that was going to be the pathway. It didn't sound like. But then also you talked about the early lesson after you kind of took the mantle of CEO, wanting to expand, having to really have a humbling experience and kind of get refocused there. How has the industry itself evolved? When you talk about from 95, 30 years later, almost like not pre-internet, but pre-internet as we know it, learning is such big business and so many different ways in which that's happened over the last 30 years. How's the company had to evolve?
Yeah, a quick little story. Pre-internet's right. I remember one of my favorite classes at the very beginning was called Necessary Net. You'd come in to learn it. It was $25. You get a sandwich from Specialties and one of their famous cookies, and an AOL disk. And you sit down, and for the first time ever, you'd hear that noise, and it would spin up the internet, and people would be like, "Wow, this is crazy." So that was right at the beginning for that. So, and to answer your question, it's really evolved and changed, which is interesting. When Learnit started, our classes were bite-sized classes. They were 90 minutes long when everything else was full day. And people thought we were nuts because of that. They said there's no way you could teach Excel classes or whatever in 90 minutes. That was my dad's idea. He just said, "Hey, look, I don't know how people could have an attention span for lasting 2 or 3 days." And now, Derek, you look at it and like everything is short micro learning and everything. It's really changed in a lot of ways, in the sense that, for one, employees demand it. more, so it's more of like if most organizations have some type of investment in learning, whether it's internally or working with an outside party like Learnit. So companies who don't, I mean, they're kind of like the tail that wags the dog these days. I mean, you're not going to be able to hire and retain great talent if you're not investing in your people. As far as actual content, um, we do a lot of work virtually now that we didn't necessarily do back then. That really evolved over COVID, where we pivoted from being about 80% in person, 20% virtual, to 15% in person, 80% virtual. And at first, I didn't think people were even going to be able to want to adapt. I mean, a lot of times at first customers were like, I don't think we can learn how to have difficult conversations or how to become more self-aware virtually. But whether it's doctor's appointments or whatever, now people really got a lot more comfortable doing training virtually. So that's a big difference. And I would say also, yeah, the bite-sized learning is also super helpful. And a plus, there is the on-demand videos, which we do a little bit of, um, as a supplement. And what I think is important is that everybody learns differently. So if I'm somebody who wants to take a live class, whether it's in person or virtual, I want to learn that way. That's my preference. But there's other people who prefer watching on-demand videos or podcasts or whatever it is. So I think there's a lot more modularities that are available now to people. And I think the next evolution with AI will be interesting. I went to the ATD, the annual, Learning and Development Conference, Talent Development Conference last year in New Orleans. And let's say there was 200 vendors, probably 150 were AI related, AI coaching, AI, whatever, everything. Not all of them are actually working yet. I don't think that AI will completely replace human-led training, but I think that it will be a great supplement, and it'll be interesting to see what happens moving forward in the future.
For sure. I mean, I remember myself and others being skeptical of even what AI is able to do now. Can't imagine, in a short amount of time, in the next couple of years, it's just going to keep expanding. It is interesting, some of my listeners too are leadership people, but then also healthcare people in the mental health space. And I equate a lot of what you're talking about with the growth of the virtual learning aspect to telehealth, especially
100%.
after COVID, it's like all the data that was, that came out of that and the research that went behind it, it's like the efficacy on virtual learning or telehealth is really strong. It's a very effective way. People are in their home; they're more comfortable. People, you're looking at someone and without all the other distractions. And from an accessibility standpoint, some people don't have transportation, but they have a phone or they have a tablet where they can connect. And so, I see a lot of crossover there, and it's just because I say that because I know a lot of people are like, well, I'm an in-person, type, and they don't give the virtual a shot, but it's proven time and time again to be very effective. Have you found that too as you've kind of been in this space?
Yeah, I think that the virtual learning is very effective. I'm also a big fan of the telehealth. I do some of the doctor's appointments that I have that way, and it's much easier than having to get in a car and drive into the city and anything. And like you said, I don't really even like going into doctor's offices, so you feel much more comfortable. Now, with all that being said, I think it's very effective. I'm an in-person type guy. I'll admit that. I uh, I believe people can do really well working remotely. Learnit is a remote-first company. Majority of our training is virtual. I do a lot of virtual trainings. I get a lot of value out of that. But I love in-person get-togethers. Whether it's like today, I've got six guys from my sales team who are downstairs. We see each other maybe once a quarter, and it's just great to get people in person.
Mhm.
So
We
I
were
think,
trying to record each other's podcasts in person.
yeah, and you blew me off. No, I'm
Oh,
kidding.
man.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding. But I think that there's a room for both, whether it's in the workforce or whether it's learning. We have some of our customers, if we're doing, like, let's say, a episode, I don't want to call it episodes, 6-part series on new managers, where sometimes we'll do 3 or 4 of those virtual, but maybe the first and the last one, if possible, everybody will get together in person. So I think it's a good combination.
Let's get into your book. I know you touched on a little bit earlier around imposter syndrome. Is that a key theme you touch on in your book as well?
It is. And surprisingly, I didn't really know that it was going to be until it's probably the number one thing that the people who read my book came to me with questions about. And it's, and I've had everybody from judges who I know to professional athletes, and they're like, yeah, man, that really hit home for me. And in my book, I talk about, I built a four-step framework really for overcoming imposter syndrome. And I didn't really realize that I did build it even until I got done writing my book. What happened was, going back to my days at Pepperdine, I went into my first meeting with my coach, Andy Lopez, at kind of like during fall practice. It's kind of like a performance review. And I sat down, Derek, and before I had a chance to sit down, and I was struggling in the preseason. And before I even had a chance to sit down, Coach Lopez said, "Hey, Damon, here's the thing. When we recruited you because we believed that you had what it took to be a solid middle of the lineup hitter, a great defensive player, and a huge asset to our baseball team." And he's like, "Son, after seeing you perform in the practice season for the last month, I don't think you have the ability to play Division I baseball." And he just kind of sat back and crossed his arms and looked straight in my eyes. And I was like, how do I get out of here? I just want to, take the bus home, go see my parents, get out of here. This is horrible. Your worst nightmare coming to light. And before I even had a chance to respond, he sat forward, he pointed at me, and he said, "Look, that is not what we think about you. The problem is that's what's in your head. That's what's going through your mind. And so you're paralyzed out there. You're not the Damon that we know. And we can surround you with, we think you have great talent. Our hitting coach thinks you have great talent, but you got to get out of your own head, and you got to just get out of your comfort zone and make it happen." And I'd like to tell you that I immediately left his office and turned things around. I didn't. I got hurt. And like I mentioned, I went to Arizona State. And when everybody was telling me, don't go, that's where I kind of developed this 4-step plan. And so the first thing I said, step 1 was, what am I really afraid of? So I labeled my fear. And okay, my fear is I go there, I don't make the team. That's embarrassing. Can I live with that? Sure. So I call that kind of purposeful awfulizing. Look at the worst case scenario, fast forward a year, and say, can you overcome that? If you can overcome that, then it's really not that big of a deal. Step number 2 is, when I got to the Arizona State, I just outworked everybody. And I've kind of done that my entire life here at Learnit as well. There's no shortcuts for hard work. I'm not saying you need to work 10 to 12 hours a day, but you need to put in the work. Step number 3 is deliberate focus, deliberate practice. It's really easy when something's tough and you struggle at it, or you're worried about being good at it, to kind of procrastinate, right? To go in different areas, maybe check your email, focus, do some small tasks. Whether it's in baseball, I struggled hitting curveballs, so I had the pitcher, the coach throw me 1,000 curveballs. When I started doing keynote speaking, if there was something that I really struggled with, I would just focus on that over and over and over until I got better at it. And a side note is, I've also found if you're working really hard and you're really focusing, it's hard. It's harder to let your mind wander. On my show, Derek, we talk about having you talked about having 60,000 thoughts and how many negative ones there are. Well, if you're really focused in on what you're doing, you can find that those thoughts tend to be a little bit, more positive. So you label your fear, step 1. Step 2 is you work hard. Step 3 is you deliberate practice. And then step 4 is, whether you're going into the batter's box or stepping on stage to give a presentation or moving into a new leadership role, it's time to learn and let go. Okay? Stop thinking about your technique. Stop worrying. Just go out there, give it your best shot. You might knock the ball out of the park. You might fall flat on your face. At the end of the day, you're going to learn either way. And a lot of times, I just don't think we give ourselves enough credit for getting out of our comfort zone and trying things. There's so many people who pass up opportunities because they're afraid of failure. And so that was kind of my whole plan, and it started with Arizona State. It's like, I'm just going to go for it, give it my best. And it really taught me so much. And now when I'm in a difficult situation or something I'm uncomfortable with, I just kind of go through those 4 steps. And yeah, since my book came out, I can't even tell you how many times people have said, you know what, I have imposter syndrome, and I think everybody does. I just think if you don't want to admit it, you're either, a sociopath or you're just lying to yourself.
Yeah, it's definitely a spectrum, and there's different seasons too, and also the misconception that's like, I'll eventually outgrow this versus how do I come to terms of acceptance of like, hey, that's there, but that's not going to keep me from still walking on the stage or stepping in the batter's box. It's like I'm okay with it being in the background. It doesn't need to be front and center. And oftentimes we make it front and center. Or I love first of all, I love that you start with naming what the fear is. Get a giant spotlight on that, because it is like fear makes us want to avoid, and if we can name it and play that out and recognize, you know what, even if that did happen, I'd still wake up tomorrow and I'd still be able to kind of move forward. That's such a great way to attack this, because it is a universal thing that we all have. And so there's a lot of pivotal moments we have as leaders to where, man, that could really be viewed as a setback, or that I'm not qualified. I know you said you go to these 4 steps. Is that kind of your playbook for whenever you face adversity, face a challenge? Are you recommending like, hey, these 4 steps, this is kind of should be your go-to strategy to get through that?
Yeah, I think it kind of depends. I mentor quite a few people, men and women, and I can't tell you how many people come to me saying, "Look, I really want to apply for this job, but I don't think I qualify for it, or this promotion and work," especially women. And I say, just go for it. So I think that's really my first thing is like, just go for it. What do you have to lose? And for those of you out there listening who maybe say, "Look, yeah, I've actually been in that place." On the flip side of things, I've interviewed thousands of people, and some of the people who don't meet the qualifications, a lot of those people, they don't have the degree or they don't have the experience, but they do have the character and the aptitude and attitude. I want to give those people a shot, and they've turned out to be fantastic. So I think that, I think what I kind of get myself into, and then I work myself through those 4 steps, is first, I'll commit to things that maybe I'm uncomfortable for. So I'm one of those guys, Derek, where I don't want to overpromise and underproduce. So if I got an opportunity to speak at the Naval Academy, and my first reaction was, why would they want me there? You got to find there's obviously got to be a lot of better keynote speakers than me, but hey, look, they asked me. And so before I had a chance to get too far into my head, I said yes. And then I kind of went through those 4 steps. And when I actually went on stage and I did that presentation, I just did my best. And I think it turned out pretty good. So I think one thing is, once you first realize that it's something that at the end of the day, it's not the end of the world if you fail, then you just got to just say yes. And like Sir Richard Branson says, one of my favorites is like, screw it, let's do it and go for it. And then work yourself through those steps, and you don't have to do it alone. I mean, I think there's a difference, though. You mentioned adversity. There's a difference between having imposter syndrome and adversity. Sometimes adversity comes up, and it's different than imposter syndrome in the sense that maybe you had a big setback or a health issue. And I've had some of those things, and I still do, to be honest. And one of the things I just tell myself is, hey, I'm not going to be a victim. I got an eye condition, so I don't have great eyesight anymore, but I'm not going to be a victim over it. Right. That's just part of what life's going to be. And I'm just fortunate for all the great stuff that I have. And I'm going to get into a community with other people who I could learn from and grow from. And you take some of the constraints that you have in life, And one of the problems with having an eye condition is you got to kind of slow down and take a little bit more time on something, which can turn out to be a benefit. So whether it's imposter syndrome or you have some big adversity, I think that there's ways. Look, we've all kind of made it through our worst days if we're still here. So it's just taking whatever it is you got going on and making the best out of it.
I love your advice when you're talking about people interviewing for things, because we play it out and anticipate the no has already been kind of stamped on a letter, and we think of all the reasons as to why we don't qualify, but having that mindset shift of, you have skill sets that they would probably say yes to as well. And I like what you said in the description. I've not read your book yet. I'm going to pick it up and read it, but I love what
I'll send you a copy.
There we go. You better sign it.
I will.
So with but one of the descriptions in this that I think is really important and lines up with a lot of what you said so far, but I think there's more to add to it. You said great leaders aren't born, they're not made either, they're in the making. So kind of talk a little bit about that aspect, because that's a debated, people think leaders are born or, whatnot. And so that's a kind of speak into that.
There are some people have some innate skills. Some people are very charismatic, and some people, whatever, right? So yes, some people are born with skills that could help them when it comes to being a leader. What I've found is that great leaders, I'm just going to repeat what you said, aren't born or made. They're always in the making. When I was first moved into the leadership role at Learnit, I said to myself, I've done some pretty good things, but if I want to continuously evolve as a leader, support my team, do what's best for Learnit, I have to be continuously learning and getting better. There's always going to be more to learn. I've had, including yourself, so many great leaders and successful people on my show. And they're all, I like to call them learn-it-alls instead of know-it-alls. Know-it-alls, they have all the answers. They have it all figured out. They think they've hit the pinnacle. They don't need anybody else's advice. I've had, the Gary Ridge from WD-40 to Stephen Covey, and they've all talked about that insatiable appetite for learning. And I just kind of did it. Look, I didn't get an MBA from Harvard Business School. Now, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that that's fantastic if you have. But I think that, you can compete, you can be a great leader, even if you have, even you went to junior college or didn't even go to college, that you can learn these skills if you put yourself in the position, you work hard, you try, and you continuously learn to be open-minded, humble, and curious. I think is so important. Be curious about how can I do things different? How can I do things better? And surround yourself as a leader with people with diverse talents and strengths, and be like, hey, I don't have this all figured out. I don't know. Let's work on this together. And I think that that's something that's really helped me define my leadership over the years.
Give me a little bit of peek behind the curtain of your organization. How do you lead? A lot of people see those three letters CEO and be like, the answer guy. Or how do you infuse that learn it all, like that you don't have all the answers, that it is more about collaboration and humility? And how does that come out in the day-to-day in your role?
Well, I've kind of learned it through. I had a guy on my show one time who called Rick Jordan, who called it the dummy tax. And what that means is, learn from the mistakes that you've had. I made plenty of mistakes, just like when I mentioned about over expanding. I was a know-it-all about it. I'm like, this is what we need to do. I learned that was the wrong way to go. Also, a challenge that I had early on was delegation. I thought that in my mind, great leaders did all the work, or you were the hero. You jumped in and you got things done. What I learned is if you do that kind of stuff, why hire great talent and put them in a box? They're not going to stay. They're going to leave. So I've learned, especially I would say over the last 10 years, to learn how to give clear direction, set goals, and give people the autonomy to do things and not worry about failure, and support them if they do fail. And I think I like calling it like a learning culture. A lot of people want to have a learning culture. And a learning culture isn't necessarily just formal training, taking a bunch of classes from Learnit or whatever. It's creating an environment where people feel like they have the psychological safety to try things, fail, and that their manager or their leader is right there, has their back, right? And they can learn from and they can grow. And I think great learning cultures, whether you're a 10,000 person company or a 50-person company, that behavior needs to be modeled by the senior leaders, the CEO. And I think the culture a lot of times of organizations come from the leader. And that's what I'm always out talking to these companies about. It's like, hey, you want to invest in your people for training, you need to be involved too. Show up to some of those sessions, give recognition to people who are participating, admit when you make mistakes, share your mistakes, be vulnerable. And, with being vulnerable, I think that there's there's kind of a fine line too. You don't want to be the vulnerable guy who's always, saying, I'm sorry, I did this, I did this. You want to be vulnerable with confidence, because at the end of the day, the last thing you want is for your team to think, well, this guy is weak. He's always complaining about he doesn't know anything. But you look at some great leaders out there over the years who've been very transparent and very vulnerable, but also said, hey, but we're going to figure this out together, and I need your help to do it. Those are the people that people want to lead, people that they can trust, who are authentic. And I think that's all wrapped into it. So people look at their leaders, the behaviors they have, and they kind of follow along. Now, a lot of people turn to me and say, well, that's easy. You've been doing this for a long time. It's more of a challenge for somebody who's stepping into a new leadership role for the very first time. They kind of feel like sometimes they have to have all the answers themselves. But I still think it's okay to say, look, I don't have an answer to this. That's why I have you on my team. Let's work this out together.
Well, and like the power of listening, right? You're coming
Huge.
in, you're stepping into a new role where probably someone else was in that role and tried some things. Maybe they were removed, and you're coming in to fix things. Or regardless, it's like day one, it should be a listening day, a listening season. Yeah, that vulnerability part, huge. I know we talked about that on your show. One of my former guests, Bob Vanderpaul, he's the guy they call when 9/11 happens, or the Virginia Tech shooting, or or the Aurora shooting happens. Like, he's pivotal to the last several decades, and kind of he shares that you want to lead with vulnerability, but no one can follow a puddle.
Right.
You don't want to stand there and be a puddle like that.
Great point.
That doesn't do anybody any good. They want to know that there's strength in the hardship. And so I think that there's such a fine line there, but the answer isn't complete stoicism, but it's not complete flailing in your tears either.
Yeah, I think, and if you are flailing in your tears, to me, that shows that you're making it all about yourself. You're putting yourself on center stage. And I don't think that, yes, nobody wants to follow a puddle. I'm going to steal that from you, Derek. I'm going to keep using that.
Steal it from Bob, who I stole it from.
Yeah, but it's absolutely true. I mean, people, if they come to work for your organization or they come to work for your team, look, they have mortgages to pay. They have kids to take care of. They need to feel like that they're working for a leader who they can go to battle with, right? That it's going to be there and has some inner strength, but also, is vulnerable enough to ask for when they need help.
When you think about driving the vision for the organization, when you understand what matters, you don't get rattled by the things that don't matter. What truly matters to Learnit?
I would say what matters to Learnit. Look, I've been doing this for 30 years, and that's a long time, and I love coming to work. Number one reason why I love coming to work is because I love, the team I have, and not just the team I have now, but the team I've had over these years, the Learnit alumni, giving people the opportunity. I feel like I'm the baseball coach, right? Where they're out on the field. I want to give them all the credit, the recognition. And so when you build a great team and you get to see them blossom and do great in their career, well, that translates into happy customers. And when it translates into happy customers, I feel like they then become stronger leaders. Now, a leader can be, you could be leading a team, or you could just be leading yourself. And if these people are becoming more confident and they're upskilling themselves, I've always believed, and I've always want to continue to believe, that that we're really having an impact on the country and the world. My goal's always been like, I want to create better leaders for the next generations. And I've never felt more passionate about that than I have since I got two young kids, a 7-year-old and a 3-year-old. And I know you got an 8-year-old, 4-year-old. I really want to see that in the decades to come, that there's stronger leadership. And I believe that the people who work at Learnit, they don't look at this as a paycheck job. I mean, they get behind the purpose and they see the value in what we do, and that we're all contributing to help upskill these people, give them confidence, all of us, to make better leaders and help us have a better world.